Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dawn's Dialogue. Today, we have a remarkable guest who has left an undeniable mark on the world of sports. Joining us is Arielle Moyal, a seasoned professional and with impressive athlete representation, marketing, and operations background. Her career is flourishing in the sports industry. Arielle's journey began in Los Angeles, where she graduated from UCLA with a bachelor's degree in political science and pre-med specialization. While working with her undergrad, she worked with the athletic department, laying the foundation for her passion for sports administration by recruiting student athletes, talent. In the university, her main focus were her teams with basketball, baseball, football, and soccer. Upon graduating, Ariel was hired by UCLA's men's basketball team, working there for 5 seasons under Ben Howland and Steve Alford. During that time, she pursued her master's degree in sport management with CSULB, graduating the top of her class. Ariel's work continues beyond there. She went to the Sacramento Kings from UCLA to run their player development department. Afterwards, she switched to the agency side to do player marketing and serving at BDA Sport Management, now WME Basketball, and was the VP at Rep One Sports, overseeing 300 professionals, men's basketball and baseball players. She runs her own consulting group with some new employment news on the horizon. We will have to find out a little later. Arielle has so much experience being the only woman in the room to now leading women in the room. Arielle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my God, that was such an awesome intro. I cannot believe we have you in this space. It's going to be amazing. So, what prompted your interest in sports marketing, branding, and athlete representation coming from the ops department?
Yeah. I first of all never thought I was going to get a job in sports, which is also entirely frustrating, I think, for every student listening to this, because I started working full time in sports almost 19 years ago. So there was a much different landscape. So why I say that is I kind of went with the flow when I first started to get jobs or offers. I would kind of jump to different places. So like going to Sacramento and doing player development was amazing. It was a new experience for me. But at the time, the Sacramento Kings were under a bit of a restructure, and I think that if you know about them during that time period, you would know that they kind of had some problems, and so it wasn't really the healthiest place to work. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew that I probably wasn't going to stay there past the 2 years I had been there. And I had a discussion with a very well-known basketball agent named Bill Duffy, who had known me for, at that point, like 7 or 8 years. And Duff had a role open for his sports agency, and he wasn't sure who to fill it with. And I wasn't sure I wanted to go the agency side, but I really trusted Bill. So, and by the way, it gave me a chance to move back home to LA. So I more or less kind of made the decision to go with my gut and follow this rule I have of sometimes jobs are about who you work for and who you work with, and maybe not always necessarily the job title. And I like leapt into that role at BDA. And I wound up loving it. So I wound up being extremely good at athlete marketing and making athletes money, and doing athlete representation. But it was kind of one of those things where somebody knew me, I knew them, and we sort of had a mutual relationship that was a good one. And I took a leap of faith. And I actually give that recommendation to people a lot. You don't know what you're going to like or not like until you try it. So if you get opportunities to try new things, like, you should definitely take them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes a long way, especially within the sports industry, because you're constantly meeting new people and you never know who you're going to end up meeting that will potentially give you a job or
Yeah.
just they'll end up working for you. So it's very much a small knit network, and you gotta go with the flow and trust your gut on that. So
Yeah. Bill met me when I was 22, right? When I was working at UCLA. And I think that, wait, in 2016, how old was I? Not quite 30. I was 29. So he gave me that job at 29, right? So like that's a 7-year relationship. So,
yeah,
and I had kept in touch. He had players on the Kings, so he continued to know who I was. So definitely remind yourself that everybody has value, and you never know when something is going to be coming your way that really matters for the people that you've known from your past too.
yeah. I mean, that's awesome. I really love to hear it, and I think that's something that for the ones who are, starting their career and just going with your gut and making sure that you keep contact with all of the people that you network with, whether it's just a hi, good morning, one day to, lengthy conversations the next, those connections are very valuable. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Uh, when did you notice a shift from being the only woman in the room to collaborating with others and leading the room of professionals within marketing departments and, other operational departments?
I still find myself to be the only woman in the room very often. Um, Other than when I worked for Bill at BDA, I have been the only woman or one of two or the only woman at a certain level. So, even when I was VP at Rep One, which by the way, just recently got bought by Clutch, so it is part of Clutch now, there was a very big gap between the next female in the company. So I'm used to kind of playing in that space. Part of the beauty about having my own consultancy group and company now is that one of my taglines is from the only woman in the room to the main woman in the room, because it's now it's my thing. I get to do whatever I want with it. I get to consult with whoever I want. I get to have clients, whoever that is. So it's been really empowering. And I've always had this really underlying part to what I try to do in sports that involves bringing women up, right? I'm part of like WISE. I'm part of their mentorship group. I really take it seriously when I get reached out to by female students in particular, because I know that it is really hard to find mentors that kind of have had paths that you want to follow. And so, while I still feel like I haven't quite tapped into the place where I feel like there is a diversity that I appreciate at the top where I'm at with women, I at least try my best to know that I'm just as capable as the people I'm around, but also I'm able to pass on those like little nuggets of knowledge to those that are trying to come up behind me.
And that's great. I mean, leading the way is definitely scary at times, but being able to reflect and, share that experience is also beneficial for the ones that are following you, the ones that are
Yeah.
leading the way themselves. So I think that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. We appreciate it.
And
Um,
I want to just quickly mention that I was 28 when I got my first female mentor, which I think is really late in life. It's like 10 years into my career. So I really just kind of say to females who have the ability to have mentees, like it's extremely important. So please try your best to grab students, because 28 years old is too late to have someone that looks like you mentor you, and you get to ask questions too.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I USF does a great job at making sure that you're well equipped for the sports industry. A lot of it has to do with the work that you put in yourself. But they do have a mentorship program, and I actually got paired
Oh,
with
cool.
um, my mentor, who's Rena, and she's working within the community relations field. She currently works for Fanatics in athlete signage, so she's doing great. But it's great to see that there are other women within the industry that are still willing to lend that hand and just be curious and knowledgeable about how we can support one another. I mean, I think that's very important. You mentioned it before, you know, leading the way, but at the same time being able to provide that bit of nuggets that can somehow in some way support other women along the way. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing that. I do have another mentorship question
Yeah.
that we're going to get to at the later part of this episode, but
Okay.
I just wanted to see, when working with BDA Sport Management, now WME Basketball, and Rep One, who you just mentioned was currently bought out by Clutch, you developed brand strategies for over 300 players. Can you take us through the strategic process of selecting contracts for players?
Yeah. So we had about 45 to 60, because it ranged every year depending on draft class, for players at BDA. And then it was about 300 at Rep One. And I'm very honest in saying that not everybody's marketable or cares about marketing. Actually, that's not fair. I think everybody can have a brand. Some people just don't particularly like want to invest in it. So then it's really hard to market them after the fact. So I would be lying if I said that I had to pay attention to 350 people, right? But there was still, at least a good amount of those where brand was important. Now, I think we'll get to it. I'm an adjunct for USF, and this is part of the things I teach in class. Like one of the things I teach in class, and two of my classes are specifically about how you negotiate deals. And part of that is your pitch. So, what I tell everybody in this class is that the first thing you have to start with when you're trying to talk about, like, a strategic process of getting these contracts for players, like there's like 10 steps before that, right? So it's
Mhm.
about building the brand first. You have to invest in the brand build. The player has to buy in. What is the brand defined as, and how are you involved in the creation of what the brand should be? So first and foremost, your sport's going to be your number one pillar, but then there's a lot of other identifiers that you have to figure out based on who that person is. So are they a gamer? Are they really into, like fantasy shows or books? Is the city that they're from like really ingrained in like who they are? Just other, do they like other sports? Are they a big foodie? Like whatever other characteristics there might be there. Like I'll give a great example. In my class right now, we talked about a particular player whose number that he wears in the league is a direct tie to his mother and grandmother passing away from cancer. So like for him, the sport number he wears in his back is about a brand element. It's about this tragedy in his life that he also works into charity initiatives and other things like that. So like there's probably these little nuances we don't even realize are part of identifiers for brands. So if you don't have a strong brand to start out with, everything else I'm going to say next just is going to fall flat.
Mhm.
Once you have a strong brand, you have to kind of identify a company or find a storyline that you think is something that you want to pitch. And before you pitch it, you have to figure out the reason. So the reason why said talent is going to match with whatever brand you're approaching. So you could have the best idea in the world, but if your
Mhm.
talent doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. So you have to start with the making the math first. Like,
Yeah.
why does the player make sense first? So in that class, I showed my students, some of the pitches that I've sent in my life. And I asked them, okay, so here's the pitch I sent to a company. I know that there's 5 identifiers in here that are my reasons why. Like, pick them out. Can you figure out what they are, right? And once you figure out your reason, your pitch then involves explaining the reason in a concise manner. People are very busy. I do not want to read an extremely long email. You need to tell me what you want in the first 2 sentences, in my opinion. A concise manner, what's the reason, but then also what the pitch is. What's the actual ask? Do you want them to be activated during your World Cup programming? Are you looking to see if they make sense for your out of home advertising campaign for the next year? Are you envisioning them working on an appearance and digital scale basis only? So it's the reason, but then also the storyline that you're trying to accomplish. And that is essentially the process for getting to then the next stages, which are negotiating the deal if somebody really likes your idea. And then from there, making sure that you have firm terms, which are accepted by your player. And then that goes to the contract stage. So there's like a lot of steps before contract is even uttered out loud.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time. One thing that I mention to people is the majority of the ideas I've had in my life have never gone to fruition. This is a failure game. I cannot force people to give me money. I cannot force people to reply to my emails. So anybody that's ever been employed by me that I've hired or worked for me at companies, I've explained to them that I expect failure to be a component of this. If you are uncomfortable with someone saying no to you, or if you are not able to understand how to pivot for a sale, this is going to be a very hard industry for you, because most of the work that you do like goes nowhere. And there's also been fantastic ideas that I've had that I've like built with brands, and then I've presented it to the client and the client says no. And you've done all that work and your player says, I don't want to do it. And so there's like a lot of frustrating elements, because at the end of the day, until 2 names are signed on a piece of paper in a contract, that the whole process, which could take you months to a year, none of it's guaranteed. So there's a lot of kind of like what ifs. And that's why I think at the end of the day that knowing the brand, building trust with your player, starting at the foundation, first and foremost, background information, etc., like is extremely important. So, I mean, that's kind of like a small breakdown of how you get to like getting these contracts for these athletes.
Wow, that's crazy. I mean, I have a little bit of experience within marketing and branding on
Mm-hmm.
the educational aspect and the educational field. And now making my transition to the sports industry, I can kind of see where a lot of it is very much intangible. Like you don't have anything to, hold on to until you get to that signing point. So making sure
Mm-hmm.
that, connecting with the players is obviously the most important, and you have to be good at what you do to work with players. I think that's
Mhm.
overall underlying statement here is you need to know what you're doing when you're doing it and how you're doing it to be successful in there. And
Mhm.
you did a remarkable job at just laying out the whole process. I mean, for somebody who, you know, maybe just listening on just to see, what this is about, they have an understanding or at least an outline of what it takes to work with the player and get their contract. So for you to
Yeah.
do that with over 300 players along your career, that's an insane amount, but that's also something to be proud of and
Yeah.
accomplished since you've accomplished it throughout the time. So
My lecture, so I'll have my last class this coming Tuesday. My class on Tuesday night was about negotiating a deal. And every class that I do, I have a guest lecturer to start the first hour. And I had an incredible entertainment and sports lawyer that I work with that came on. And their conversation was all about the negotiation and how you get negotiate best for your client and protect their IP. And one of the things that they said over and over that I think is really important when you are considering a role like this is I just gave you a framework, but you have to understand the game because you have to know when you should pull your like when you should show your cards, the
mhm,
timing of your ask. You've got to be able to understand what the company's motivations are. It's not as simple as like following that step. It's like almost like a gut feeling of like understanding your players' motivations, but like how are you going to match it? But then also knowing the perfect timing to be like a shark in at the negotiation table, essentially. Like
mhm,
do you know when to make the ask? Do you know when to push a little bit harder? Do you know when you can strategically leverage certain things that you know aren't as important for maybe higher compensation or whatever that is? So there really is like an art to this also, and that only comes about with practice. Because I was definitely not as good at this when I first started. Actually, the first couple times I got told no on deals, I was like blown away. I was like, why? This is the greatest idea ever. Like, why don't you want my idea? Like, I don't get this. And then my boss was just like, oh, that's normal. Like, this is going to happen all the time. And I was like, this is infuriating, right? Like, and now I'm on the other side of the table being like, oh yeah, it's going to happen all the time.
the shift in dynamic is crazy, but I mean, I think it goes a long way to say that, and then you mentioned it, practice. Like you just have
Yeah.
to be comfortable with, working around certain. No case is going to be the same. No athlete is going to be the same. There's always going to be those little defining factors that separate them from, other athletes and, brands the same way. So making sure that you're able to look at those and analyze how they can benefit in your playing field, and just like you said, understanding the game, making sure that you're aware of all the pieces that are attached to it and everybody who's part of it too, because it can go from the smallest task, and that may be me, or to the biggest person in the room, that may be you, and that is
Mm-hmm.
you at time to time. So being able to delegate and be that shark is definitely something to understand, but just conceptually, like you have to be able to put your mind to it and accept the rejection at times, because I know that's hard.
Yep.
So you did touch about it a little bit throughout the conversation. You're recently a new adjunct professor at USF Sport Management Master's Program. You teach the course teams, agencies, and how athletes make their money. Can you tell us about your journey and transition to moving into the classroom? You seem very busy and very, very engaged in the work that you do, which is great and amazing. But what prompted you to want to become a teacher and teach the younger generation?
Oh man. I had to figure out so much of my life shit by myself. And like, I wish that I had somebody that could have helped me in a lot of that. I think I'm the personality type. And I think that my upbringing set me up perfectly for just getting shit done and figuring it out.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that's the right answer because there should be more guidance, I think, sometimes. But luckily, this industry did not swallow me up because I can be that person. But there are so many things that students who are trying to enter this game do not understand about sports. And my class in particular, I think, raises the curtain on a lot of those issues. So, first and foremost, I've spoken at conferences. I've been like featured speakers multiple times. So the speaking part's not an issue for me. And I'm very transparent. I think compared to a lot of other guest speakers I've heard, like if you ask me something, I'll be absolutely honest about the answer, whether or not it's going to be off putting to some people or not. And I actually think that ties into this class, which I'll get to. In COVID, I was craving connection with other people. I was home all the time. I mean, I have my lovely husband, but it's just not the same. Like, I needed other stimulation from other people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I got asked by UCLA to do a guest lecture for their graduate, for their business program at Anderson they have a sport and entertainment division.
Mm-hmm.
And so I created a lecture for them and I was like, man, this is kind of fun. And so since then, I've been guest lecturing all across the country. So I've done NYU, actually, I'm doing NYU again in March, Syracuse, UConn, Michigan. I mean, most of the schools in Southern California and LA. I've actually guest lectured at USF before for Michael Goldman's class or marketing class. And so there's dozens of schools and I started to really like it. But most of those were on just like the athlete marketing side. So like, how do you market an athlete? It's a great question, but I think that there's a lot of things that people aren't asking. And through doing that, and also through having students intern for me, oftentimes on the agency side, I'd have kids who wanted to intern for me because they wanted to be an agent. And it's not the same. Like the departments are not the same. And when I would talk to people, and it was actually Ashley Sloper, who's part of your program. She and I were speaking at the same conference about a year ago, and we were talking about stuff. And she mentioned something, and I was like, you guys really need a class on this. And she's like, well, why don't you make it and teach it? And what essentially that is I hear kids all of the time go, I want to be an agent. And I don't think anybody understands how vastly expensive that is, how extremely hard that is, how it is not as glorious as you think it is, and the bureaucracy that goes into becoming an agent. I'll give you a statistic that when I sat in class, I saw jaws drop around the room. Taking into consideration all of the high-paying agents, the median, the middle amount, the median amount that an agent makes by definition for everybody that's PA certified is $56,000 a year to an upside of 110. And when you think about being an agent, you think that you're going to be Jerry Maguire and you're going to be making millions of dollars and all this other stuff. That's not the case unless you're a main agent. There's a difference between an agent and a main agent. And so all of these little nuances made me really understand that I don't think people understand the structures of teams and agencies. So my first class is on the structure of the team and agencies. Teams, you kind of all get. Business side, basketball's in my brain. Business side, ops side. I think the way that they work together or don't was the kind of more new information. But then I did the same breakdown for agencies on my first lecture. And I think it was really eye-opening for students. The second one is about CBAs, how agents become agencies, the amount of money, time, et cetera, it takes, and also to maintain that. Player contracts and draft processes. Because the whole thing stems into how athletes make money. You got to start with how these teams are structured and organized and these agencies, how they coexist together, how they exist with athletes. Then it's about the nitty-gritty of how the athlete essentially makes its first cut of money. It's the playing contract, the definition of what PAs are compared to leagues, all that stuff. Then the next two classes are how athletes make money outside of those components, marketing, digital, et cetera, et cetera. Class 4 is about how teams actually have a hand in making athletes money. Most people don't understand group rights, passive rights, or licensing rights. And then we also did a breakdown of a campaign. The 5th class is about negotiating an athlete deal, which goes all the way to contract. And then the 6th class is about executing. Once the contract's done, you're not done. You have to execute the deal. And what does it mean for these various forms of advertising? Layered in all of this, and the majority of the theme in all of this, is the relationship the agent takes through this process. And I think that it's been very eye-opening for students in particular to see the back end of how agencies really work and these relationships exist, because they are not as glamorous. They are not very profitable. This is extremely expensive. It's extremely risky. And I feel bad when kids go, I want to be an agent, so they just think they need to study for a test and pay a fee. They have no idea. And I feel like this is not taught at all. I don't think there's any book on this. I couldn't find a textbook for my class. This is all by knowledge, and some kids cannot risk or take the risk of doing this as a career. It just is the reality. And a lot of the people that succeed in this space have a lot of financial power behind them because it is risky. So As somebody who grew up in a socioeconomic status where that was never going to be an option for me, I've worked my entire life. I had to get a full-time job the minute I went to college. Like, I could never have taken the risk to try to be an agent. There's no way. I would have fallen financially into such a hole that I couldn't have gotten out of. And I feel like that is a warning sign people need to understand, because I really, really, really hate when I see students or younger kids trying to dive into these careers and they don't know the repercussions of it. So when you ultimately ask me why I moved into the classroom, it's because I realized I had valuable information that most people do not share. And so when I talked to Ashley, I was like, you know what, fine, bet I'll make your class. And I made it, right? And then obviously you guys liked it enough to vote me in. So I know my class is really hard. I tell my students all the time they're troopers. They're really difficult and dense discussions. I mean, CBAs on their own are extremely, I mean, you could teach a whole class on CBAs.
Mhm.
So I try to be as kind as possible in the grading. And also we have group discussions and I let them go on rabbit holes with me so we can have these kinds of real conversations. But
Mhm.
it's a topic I think that's extremely, extremely important for places to teach, because nobody teaches it.
Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity, and I think that's what sets the program apart as well. Is the program is constantly looking for ways to reinvent themselves in a way that will support future sport management students, whether that's currently now, like I said, myself in the program, the cohorts to come. I mean, USF is constantly accepting new cohorts at the San Francisco campus and even at the Orange County
Mm-hmm.
campus here in LA. So it's like you have the opportunity to learn about the real dense mechanics and just operations that go on within all parts of the industry. I think one of my current professor, Professor Nola Aga, she gave us a little visual breakdown of each way the sports industry is represented. Like you mentioned, there's the business part of it, there's the team aspect, there's the
Mm-hmm.
agency side, there's the nonprofit side. Like there are so many angles that you can get into the
Mm-hmm.
sports management side. However, not everything is talked about. There's a very level surface discussion that we have within the industry, and it's like not until you're in the space do you know what actually happens. So being able to provide that perspective and the knowledge and the experiences that you've had within your career and being able to bring it to the classroom, I think that's a selling point within its own. I'm not even in my second year yet, and I can already tell I'm going to be the first one on your list.
I
So
hope
it's
to
like,
God it's not so hard that the reputation is like, man, this is a hard class. Like, don't take it. Because I do think it's like just such a valuable class.
no, yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely up to the student. That is one thing
For
I am going
sure.
to say. I mean, like you have to, if you want it, you're going to do it. You're going to take the time to
Mm-hmm.
learn and to understand. As with anything, I think it's just whether that's a job, that's your studies, that's, whatever your hobbies are, you're going to take the time to learn it, and it's ultimately going to make you better. And you mentioned not knowing a big portion of what contract signing is, and the execution part, because there's a very mundane surface level discussion. But for those of us that want to be the top of our class and want to be the top of our field, I think that's definitely something to look forward to. So even though your class is hard, I think students are going to be up for the challenge, and it's going to test them, to really see it. Like you
I hope
mentioned,
so.
everybody says they want to be an agent, but do you really understand what it takes to be the agent?
Yeah.
And I've also heard opposite. You have a class of, let's just say, hypothetically speaking, 30 students, and you know 20 of them raise their hand and say, oh yeah, I want to be an agent. But then if you look later in the future, the 10 that didn't raise their hand are actually the ones that are agents. So it's like you have a different perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
you have different ways of looking at it, and different perspectives are the same thing, but it's more of like who's going to do the work to get there. And if you're taking your class, when students take your class, they're going to see that, they're going to see the different aspects that it takes to be the best in that industry. So it's very exciting. So
Thank
happy
you.
we
Well, I can't wait to see you in a year.
yeah, I mean, I super excited to get there. I think I commented on your LinkedIn too. Oh my God, this is so exciting. Um, so with building your class, I know you just gave us the whole breakdown. Um, have there been any challenges for you throughout it? And then now that you're about to complete your first course, what would you like to incorporate into your course moving forward during the upcoming years?
The challenges have been the timing. Like, it truly has almost taken 4 hours every single time. Now, part of that is because every single lecture starts with a guest speaker, and I make it a point to pick somebody who's that topic, and they're all extremely high up people in the industry. So, like, add value for students. Like you're going to get someone in front of you that's someone you want to be around, right? But that takes an hour, right? Um, so I think the timing has been hard. I mean, I need to get better at that. I also, I think that a challenge for me, and this I think goes into like how I want to do the class moving forward, is I forget sometimes that like this is second nature to me. So I'll use like industry knowledge or jargon, and then someone will be like, I don't understand what that word means or whatever, and I have to go, I'm so sorry. And so I have a policy in my class, they can interrupt me at any point in time because I'd rather they understand in the moment than ask later. So I have to remind myself that like I've kind of probably pause and be like, are there questions on like this really complicated thing that I just talked about, right? Instead of moving on. What I want to incorporate in my class moving forward. I don't know. Is this a selfish answer? Like, I think it's just getting better at actually doing it. This is my first time doing this class. I did that athlete one for years, like as a guest. So I had that kind of down pat. This is my first time doing this class. So I'm really going to be intrigued to see what the students put on their evaluation. And I'm going to tell them all, like, I want you to be honest because I just want to get better so that I can maybe flow through things that are complicated topics a little bit better. Like maybe some of the content was too overwhelming and I need to restructure it. Like I'm actually going to lean on my students to kind of tell me what could be changed so that the class as an overall just sort of turns out in a better manner.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I mean, I think all feedback is good feedback, no matter what way you look at it.
Yeah.
You're trying to better yourself, and I think that just goes a long way as to show, how determined and how passionate you are about the work that you do, and then being able to provide the education to students that's currently in the program or who are going to be enrolling, in the future years. Just bettering yourself is never wrong, and
Well,
being able.
I believe you can teach up and down. I've always thought that. And have I met a boss or two that disagreed with my thinking that I can bring some knowledge to the table? Of course, I think some people lead with egos instead of leading with a smart way. But I think anybody that has worked for me will tell you that I do not squander advice. If you think that you have a better idea or could do it better, or you want to challenge me in a respectful way, I'm all about it because you need to learn from everyone you interact with. That is up and down, side to
Mhm.
side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the better way of learning, having
For
that
sure.
holistic environment, because you get every single aspect of it, and you have questions, you have somebody to turn to, or you have an idea, you have somebody presenting it to. And then at the same time, you have leaders at the top who are never constantly not learning. You know what I mean? Like there's different modalities and
Mm-hmm.
methods to getting better, and it may even come from the bottom, so
Mm-hmm.
up and down is left to right, whatever way you want to
Yeah.
look at it. Diagonally is always good. So
Like
thank you.
I've had 3 questions this class that I couldn't answer, and I think 2 came from the same student, and both times I was like, I have no idea. I'm gonna have to ask somebody and come back to you because like I don't have all the answers. And I did.
Yeah.
I like went and asked people in the industry, and I was like, is this right? Like, did I did I think about this right? Like, tell me if I'm wrong, and that way I can report back and make sure they have the right information. And in fact, one of the questions has been so complicated. Mario, I'm sorry, I haven't ignored your question. I'm trying to figure it out. It's been so complicated that I have asked multiple people who have like worked in comparable roles and they don't know the answer to it. So Mario might be getting an email from me in 6 months being like, I finally have your Lakers spectrum question answered. So
But I mean, those are good questions. I think that, like Mario, I've seen in the hallways, and we briefly chatted. Um, but you can tell that he definitely has a perspective, and he's willing to stick it
yeah,
out to get his answers. So for him to be asking challenging questions like that, and then for you as an industry professional, you're like, dang, I didn't really know about that, or I didn't really look
yeah.
at it. Like, let me do. It brings light to both situations, both in a learning aspect and a professional aspect. So kudos to Mario for asking the hard questions and getting the recognition on Don's dialogue today.
I don't know.
All right, my last question. In light of National Women and Girls in Sports, mentorship has been a core pillar for you throughout your journey. Who has been a solid mentor to you who has helped you and has helped shape your professional career? And then what advice can you share with the girls, women, and any individual looking to join the sports industry?
So I've had quite a few mentors in life. I do have two staff members from Cal State Long Beach that really helped me transition from like entry level roles and that getting that master's degree and working in the industry. And that's Diane Higgs, who's a G, I love her, and Charles Harris. Both are wonderful people, and I still to this day know them very well. Um, but my biggest mentor, that when you don't have people that look like you, that experience the same things you do, or maybe don't have the same background as you do, there self-doubt can be one of the worst things you take upon yourself, because you don't have a pulse check. You don't have someone to ask questions to be like, is it me? Is it this place? Like, am I thinking about this wrong? Like, and so I was at the Sacramento Kings when they hired the second ever coach in the NBA that is a woman. That was Nancy Lieberman. So Becky Hammond was first. Nancy Lieberman was second. So there was like an executive assistant to, so there's like a 45 people in ops. There's like an EA to the general manager. There's this woman named Melanie Stocking, who at the time was like kind of an admin ops hybrid, who now is, I think, running player development stuff and a lot of team ops. Mel is a G. That whole team is going to fall apart the day that she walks. Mel, I love you. But like, she saved me. So it was like basically Mel and I, and then it was 48 like men. And Nancy shows up, and I'm going to be sharing this locker room with, getting ready for games and like doing stuff with this double Hall of Famer. Like, this is bananas to me. And I actually don't really get starstruck very often. Like, the amount of famous people that I've met in my life that I'm sure other people will like shit their pants over, like, I could care less. I think maybe being born and raised in LA, like, gave me a little bit of a thick skin with that. But there are some people in my life who I've always idolized, which I was like, if I ever met them, like, I would be over the moon. And Nancy has always been in that list. And so lo and behold, she's coming to be my coworker, and I'm like, this is crazy, right? And there's something about bonding when it's just you and that person, and you're getting ready for games in the same locker room together, and you get to have your shit talk, and you get to ask questions. And, I started to be like, these things are happening and I'm frustrated. And lo and behold, this double Hall of Famer, one of the most accoladed basketball players, men's or women's, of all time, is telling me she feels the same way. That certain people are not acting appropriately, that certain administration is problematic. And so when I had a year experience there of being like, Jesus Christ, like, what are these feelings and where are they coming from? And then all of a sudden this person shows up, and like, it's not just me, like, it's clearly a systemic issue. Then you realize that you can enter the world and the spaces you're supposed to be in a very different context. That self-doubt is a little bit less self-doubty. It's more of a general understanding of what is what. And to this day, she's still one of my closest friends and mentors. I mean, she's technically a client of mine right now. So, it's one of those items where our relationship has morphed, but because of such like a trusting relationship, I do very vulnerable things for her now. And so having somebody like that has just been absolutely a game changer in my career, period. I'm so lucky that I can say that person is my mentor. But, there's always been like other people too. I think as I've gotten older, I've done a really good job of like, kind of like, I call it like kind of like my like little sport lady crew. Like, it's like the women in my life that we all have gone through the trenches in the same capacity together, maybe not the same agencies, but we've all been like the same kind of position at an agency, here, there, wherever. And we honestly talk to each other. And that reminds you again that like, no, like, the issue that you keep having with all the male agents isn't actually just you and your problem. It's also happening here and this other place that you revered, sorry. So that it's just kind of maybe an industry-wide thing, and maybe something just industry-wide needs to change. And so like, I think mentorship amongst peers has also been super helpful and big for me. And that's, again, but I would say that like probably Charles, Diane, and Nancy have been the three biggest in my entire life.
Awesome. That's great. I mean, I think looking at experiences is definitely important, considering that, just like you mentioned, you may be going through one thing and you may be experiencing something, but not to say that you're doing it alone. You just have to find
Yeah.
the people that you connect with, definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, even Mel, who I reference, like I love Mel to death because she's still there and we get to reminisce, but then I've watched her career grow and I'm super happy and proud for her. And, we still pulse check each other sometimes. And so, you just gotta hold on to those people that are good to you. I forgot to answer your advice question. So, oh man, see, how much time do you have for advice? Because I could like give you advice all day, right? Um, okay, I think I'm gonna pick this one. You are not too much, and your energy isn't too much, and I think you need to really understand that because there's going to be plenty of people who are going to just not like you for the sake of not liking you. There's going to be plenty of people that don't like you because you are not a people pleaser. There's going to be plenty of people who don't like you because you don't do everything that they say when things that they're asking you are have no integrity or are gross. There's You're going to butt heads with people no matter what. I think that in general, I'm a really good person who's been very good at maintaining relationships as well as being respectful in those relationships. But there are people that hate me for the sole fact that maybe something that they wanted from me didn't go the way they wanted. Not my problem. And
Mhm.
however somebody else wants to react, it's not my problem. Because the only thing in life that you can control is how you act and how you perceive the world. So continue to be unabashedly yourself, continue to be unapologetic, and continue to have whatever energy you want. And in that, if you are applying for roles, and this is my advice for younger girls, men too, if you're applying for roles and the square peg is not fitting in the round hole and something feels off and it feels like you keep getting strung along or it feels like people are being indecisive or you get like effed over after you've been interviewing for 2 months or whatever else is happening, it's probably a place you don't want to work in the first place. And you have to be able to just bounce to the next option and let that go because there's a reason that the universe is guiding you away from that job and putting you somewhere different. So I know it's really hard to take that advice like in the moment. And I think that what I alluded to, like when what you alluded to in your intro, like I'll be able to hopefully share some really great news about myself coming up. But I think that has been a 2-year journey of letting the universe guide me and then ending up where hopefully this goes. And when that happens, I feel like a lot of things I didn't understand will come into place. So even people at my level and age are still feeling sometimes that little bit of like, wary stranger, like kind of like walking a road they don't understand. And just maybe it's about embracing it. And it's also just letting go of places and things that are clearly not going to serve you.
And I think that's amazing advice. Honestly, it resonated with me. I'm pretty
I
sure
thought
it's
you
gonna
were working.
resonate with the thousands of viewers that we're hopefully gonna have listen to this podcast. But I mean, thank you so much for sharing that. The
Yeah.
unapologetic part, the take making sure that you go with your gut feeling in terms of like applying for positions and things like that. I mean, we've in the USF program, you hear it all the time. You just apply, 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 and forget where you're going, right? Like, not forget where you're going, but forget where you applied to. And then, a few months down the line, you're like, oh, dang, I forgot I applied for that. And
Yeah.
then you start the interview process over and over and over again. But I mean, you can tell within the interview process who you really want to work for and who you really don't. Some of them are
Mhm.
extremely long time, 2 months. I've been in an interview like that. Some are within a span of 2 weeks, very quick. So it's like you have the interview process says a lot on both ends as the interviewer and as the interviewee. So definitely taking that into account when you're going through that process will really help you and guide you in terms of like where you're supposed to be, right? The spaces that you're going to be encouraged to
Mhm.
work in, and the spaces that are just going to elevate you to your next spot, right? Like we've
Mhm.
always started somewhere in a department where we didn't think we'd end up, and here we are, going from one department to the next department and being the director or being the coordinator for that department. So thank you so
I
much
want
for
to give you a real world example of my advice in action. So that has
sharing.
nothing to do with job applying.
Mhm.
Every time I see something about the rise in women's sports and how like it's shocking that viewership is up a certain amount of numbers or it's women are breaking records of attendance or whatever, I like just sit here and laugh and I go, we've been fucking telling you. Sorry, I just cursed. But like that is what I'm talking about. Like, right? Like women who have been in the game for a while have been boldly saying, you all are dumb for not taking advantage of the consumerism that exists in women's sports. First
Mm-hmm.
of all, females are usually in charge of the finances of households. So why are you not tapping into them? And then all this other stuff about women's sports, and you're watching these records breaking, and finally, like, big sport media companies are like, sure, let's finally do TV deals. Like it's a little too late for me, but it's also like, I'm happy it's happening, but also it's only for the bold voices. It's only for the people that were unapologetic. It's only for the people that kept saying over and over that you were missing opportunity, that we finally got here. So like, don't not be that person. The protagonist, you live a more exciting life anyways, first of all. But the protagonist is the person that gets stuff done. Like, that's the person you want to be. You don't want to be the person that just kind of blends in. At least
And
I don't.
no, yeah, you have an absolute point. I think so. I'm very big in sports, right? Hence the sport management program, hence the tournament building for my background. But like amongst my friends, it's like, Alyssa, like, why do you? I'm like, dude, there are so many girls that like sports. Like, my friends may not be the biggest sports fans, but they'll come along and they'll join me on a game or two, or they'll sit down and watch the TV with me, whether I have ESPN or some sort of game on in the background. But they're like, they don't understand the amount of like female engagement that the sports industry has, and it's something that is barely being shown upon, and barely showing, within the uprise in attendance or the uprise in merch. Consumerism by females has been a very, very big part of the sports industry, and for
Mm-hmm.
other people to barely realize it, it's like, no, it's been here for a really long time.
Yeah.
People are just now shedding light on the situation. So
Yeah.
we've done the work. Me as a sports fan growing up, and it's like, I like sports. Why don't you guys believe me that I like sports? I've played sports. Everything is revolved around sports for me. But it's like, oh, there are actually more people like you that actually enjoy sports. And it's like, well, thank you for finally getting there. But, like, we've been here for the longest. So I can absolutely attest to that. And I believe it too when I see it and I read it in the articles.
Yeah.
All right, Ariel. Well, thank you so much for dropping all of these gems and all of these bits of knowledge for us and for our listeners to kind of take on, as they listen and then they go through the program if they choose to. I know you've plugged how much of a great opportunity USF Sport Management Program is. So we're hoping to see more applicants, but then also we're willing to see, what other industry professionals we have on here. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah. And I will see you in a year, right?
Yes, ma'am. I'll be the first on your list.
Great. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you.